There's something about coming home that feels different to any other part of a journey. Time away might be good for you. Time to rest, to recharge, to be with family. But the return carries its own kind of comfort. For a lot of people, it's the thought of the familiar waiting at the other end. Something as simple as putting the kettle on and making a cup of tea. For Tracy Houghton, heading home that afternoon with Ethan, Josh and Amy, it should have been no different. But the journey slowed, then stopped, and the promise of that cup of tea was quietly replaced by something else entirely. Because on the A34 that day, what lay ahead was not just a delay, but a moment that would change everything. Tracy and her partner Mark Goldsmith had decided a break was in order. It was the 10th of August 2016, and the children were off school for the summer. Tracy, a finance officer with Central Bedfordshire Council, was used to structure, responsibility and the steady rhythm of working life, while Mark, a telecommunications engineer, was more hands-on, the kind of person who kept things running without most people ever noticing. So they packed their bags, filled the cars with the children and headed down to Devon for a camping trip, looking forward to a few days away. Time to slow down, to be together, and to step out of the routine for a while. But all too soon it was time to head back. Now they were making their way towards Milton Keynes, travelling in convoy along the A34. The two cars never far apart, part of the same journey separated only by a short stretch of road. Inside the cars, the atmosphere was relaxed in that familiar way that comes at the end of time away. The children were already turning their thoughts towards home. Ethan and Josh were looking forward to getting back out to the park, to pick up where they'd left off, like so many others that summer, caught up in the excitement of Pokemon Go, planning where they might go next and what they might find. And Amy was looking forward to seeing her new kitten, Vimto, again. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of thoughts that fill the final miles of a journey, when home is close enough to start imagining it. Ahead of them, traffic began to slow. Nothing to suggest anything out of the ordinary, nothing to cause concern. Further back along the same stretch of the A34, another journey was unfolding. A fully loaded heavy goods vehicle was making its way along the carriageway, moving with the steady momentum that comes from hours on the road, part of the constant flow of freight that passes through this route every day. At the wheel was Tomasz Kroker, a 30-year-old Polish national living in Andover, Hampshire, working his way through a route that would have felt routine. Only a few months earlier he had become a father, his life, like so many others, shaped by the balance between work and home. That afternoon he was simply continuing on his way, sharing the same stretch of road as Tracy and Mark, separated only by distance, both journeys moving in the same direction toward the same point in time. Ahead, the road began to rise gently, the A34 stretching upward into a gradual incline where traffic had already begun to bunch together. Vehicles slowed further, each driver easing off, adjusting, brake lights glowing steadily now, until movement gave way to a complete stop. One by one, drivers settled into the queue, holding position on the slope, leaving space where they could, waiting for the road ahead to clear. In the queue ahead, Tracy's car remained still on the incline. Just behind her, Mark and his son Jake waited in the second car, close enough that what happened next would unfold directly in front of them. For those waiting, there was still no reason to expect anything different. The road was quiet, a glance in the mirror perhaps, a fleeting awareness of something approaching, but nothing that demanded action. But further back, the lorry continued its approach. Inside the cab, Tomasz Kroker had not been watching the road ahead. The dashcam inside the cab records it all. For a prolonged stretch of the journey, his attention had shifted away from the carriageway in front of him. Instead, he was focused on his mobile phone, and the lorry maintained its speed. At around 50 miles per hour, it moved steadily along the carriageway. The road in front of him had already changed, from open carriageway to a line of stationary vehicles, but nothing to suggest the driver had recognised what lay ahead. For second after second, the view ahead remains steady, the road stretching forward while his attention stays elsewhere. The traffic ahead is visible, but not acted upon. And then, less than a second before impact, He looks up. In that instant, everything changes. The phone drops from his hand. Both hands move to the wheel. His body braces instinctively, a sudden, desperate attempt to respond to something that is already too close. But there is no time left. The distance has already gone. The lorry struck the line of stationary traffic without slowing. The first vehicle in its path, a Mazda driven by Adam Pearson, was hit with overwhelming force, thrown forward and overturned, coming to rest on its roof at the side of the road. Its movement no longer under the driver's control, but dictated entirely by the energy behind it. The impact carried on, striking more vehicles in the line. The Citroën carrying Mark Goldsmith and his son Jake was struck next, driven forward violently. Behind it, the trailer loaded with camping gear and bicycles from the trip was torn apart, scattering belongings across the road, some striking the front of the cab as the collision unfolded. In front of them was the Vauxhall Corsa, driven by Tracy Houghton, who was directly behind another stationary lorry. There was no time to react. Mark and Jake were forced forward into Tracy's car, the gap between them disappearing in an instant as the energy from behind pushed through. Tracy's smaller car was crushed underneath the rear of the lorry with such intensity that the larger vehicle was lifted from the road, its weight displaced by the force beneath it. The impact was devastating, and tragically, Tracy and the 3 children did not survive. For those behind, including Mark and Jake, the sequence unfolded directly in front of them, an event measured in seconds, but impossible to process in real time. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the movement stopped, but the moment didn't. Inside the cab there is a brief, stunned stillness, and then the reality begins to settle in. Tomasz Kroker opens the door and climbs down from the lorry, stepping out onto the carriageway. Witnesses later describe him as visibly shaken, in tears, repeating to himself, "I've killed them, I've killed them," struggling to comprehend what has just happened. Just in front, in the Citroën, Mark Goldsmith and his son Jake are still in their seats. What has unfolded in front of them has happened too quickly to process. But then instinct takes over and they step out of the car. Jake moves forward, out into the road, drawn towards the wreckage ahead, close enough to see that the car that they had been following just seconds earlier is no longer there in any recognisable form. Off to the side of the carriageway, the Mazda driven by Adam Pearson lies overturned in the verge, its final position separate from the rest of the collision. He is seriously injured, but alive, later described as the lucky one. Further back, more drivers are beginning to leave their vehicles. Some move forward, trying to help. Others stop short, confronted by the scale of what they can see ahead. Phones are already being taken out, emergency services dialed, voices unsteady as people try to describe what has just happened. On the opposite carriageway, traffic has slowed. Drivers heading in the other direction begin to realise something is wrong, some slowing, some stopping, others looking across at a scene that is still settling into place, the full reality not yet understood, but impossible to ignore. Within minutes, the first sirens began to carry across the road. Police units arrived quickly, moving to close the carriageway and push people back from the wreckage, creating space for what would follow. Behind them came fire crews and paramedics, taking in the scale of what had happened before moving forward with a kind of quiet urgency. The road no longer resembled a queue of traffic. Vehicles were scattered across both lanes, some forced into unnatural positions, others barely recognisable. The path of the collision marked clearly through the line. Paramedics began moving from vehicle to vehicle, assessing injuries, making rapid decisions about who needed immediate care and who could wait. The situation was complex, and within a short time additional support was requested. 2 air ambulances were dispatched, landing directly on the closed carriageway. Their arrival brought specialist medical teams who moved straight to the most seriously injured. Adam Pearson was stabilised at the roadside before being airlifted to the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford, his injuries severe but survivable. Nearby, Mark Goldsmith and his son Jake were treated for their injuries. Mark had suffered broken ribs, while both were shaken but conscious. They were later taken by land ambulance to the Royal Berkshire Hospital, along with others who had been caught up in the collision. In total, 9 people were treated at the scene for minor injuries, many of them able to walk, though clearly affected by what they had witnessed. Around them, motorists stood back along the carriageway, some speaking quietly to one another, trying to piece together what had happened, others simply watching as the emergency response unfolded. Police officers moved between them, taking early accounts where they could, while at the centre of the scene, the work continued. A short distance away, Tomasz Kroker remained at the roadside, visibly shaken, still struggling to process what had taken place. He was arrested at the scene. As the afternoon turned into evening, the A34 was closed in both directions between Chieveley and West Ilsley, traffic stretching for miles in either direction. Through the night, under artificial light, recovery teams worked carefully to remove the damaged vehicles, clear debris, and begin repairing sections of the road. By the time the carriageway reopened the following morning, more than 12 hours had passed, but for those who had been there, the events of that afternoon were far from over. In the hours that followed, the focus shifted to understanding how something like this could happen on a clear summer afternoon. Specialist collision investigators worked through the night, examining the scene in detail, measuring distances, documenting positions, and gathering every piece of evidence that might explain the sequence of events. The damaged vehicles were recovered and the carriageway repaired, and gradually a picture began to form. At first, Tomasz Kroker told police that his brakes had failed. He repeated the same explanation to his employer, insisting he had not been using his phone, saying he'd only been listening to the radio. But the evidence did not support that account. Inside the cab, a dashcam had been recording. When investigators reviewed the footage, it showed something very different. Faced with that evidence, he admitted he had been distracted. Further investigation revealed that little more than an hour before the crash, he had signed a declaration confirming that he would not use a mobile phone while driving. The case would later come before Reading Crown Court. Inside the courtroom, events of that afternoon were reconstructed in detail. The dashcam footage was played, showing the final seconds leading up to the collision. For those present, families, survivors, and witnesses, it was difficult to watch. Some left the room rather than see it again. Kroker sat in the dock, at times covering his face, visibly distressed as the evidence was presented. The court heard how his attention had been so limited in those final moments that, in the judge's words, he might as well have had his eyes closed. He pleaded guilty to 4 counts of causing death by dangerous driving and 1 count of causing serious injury by dangerous driving. In October 2016, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and banned from driving for 7 years. For the families affected, the sentence brought a form of conclusion, but not closure. In statements read outside the court, the impact of what had happened was made clear. The loss described not in legal terms, but in the absence left behind, in the lives that would never return to normal. In the years that followed, the story did not end with the court case. For those left behind, life did not return to what it had been before. The absence remained, constant and deeply felt in the everyday moments where those who had been lost should still have been. Among those closest to that loss was Kate Goldsmith. Kate is Amy and Jake's mother. On the day of the crash, she had not been on the A34. She had been waiting at home, expecting her daughter to return from the camping trip. Instead, she would become one of the many people whose lives were permanently altered by what happened on that road. In the months and years that followed, she made a decision. Rather than step away from it, she chose to speak. Working with organisations such as the Road Victims Trust, Kate became an advocate for road safety, helping to support other families facing the same kind of sudden, life-changing loss. She also worked alongside the AA Charitable Trust, supporting campaigns focused on driver behaviour and the risks of distraction behind the wheel. But much of her work has been more direct than that. Standing at the roadside during police operations, she has spoken face-to-face with drivers who had been stopped for using their mobile phones while driving, explaining in simple terms what that decision can lead to. Not in theory, in reality. In those moments, the message is not delivered as a warning, but as lived experience. She has described Amy's death as completely avoidable. The crash on the A34 has since been used in national awareness campaigns, with dashcam footage released by police in an effort to show, as clearly as possible, how quickly a routine journey can turn into something irreversible. Over time, laws around mobile phone use while driving have become stricter. Penalties have increased. Enforcement has improved. But for many of those affected by this case, the belief remains that more still needs to be done. Because the issue is not just about rules or penalties. It's about behaviour, and about understanding that the risk is not distant or unlikely, or something that happens to other people. It is immediate and it is real. For those who want to support that work, organisations such as the Road Victims Trust and Break continue to provide support to families and campaign for safer roads, offering ways for people to contribute, donate, or learn more about the impact of serious collisions. Because for the families affected by what happened on the A34, the hope has always been that something might come from it. By telling the story, by speaking openly, others might think twice before making the same decision. There is no large memorial on the A34 marking the place where Tracy, Ethan, Josh and Amy lost their lives. Traffic still passes through that stretch of road every day, most drivers unaware of what happened there in the summer of 2016. For most people, the journey home ends in the same familiar way. The kettle on, a cup of tea, the comfort of being back where you belong. And most of the time, we don't think twice about it. But sometimes, all it takes is a moment for that ending to change. Now, I think the circumstances leading to this tragedy speak for themselves. Mobile phones are now a part of everyday life, but there's an obvious reason why using one behind the wheel of a vehicle, no matter whether it's a car or a truck, is both illegal and completely reckless. Our condolences go out to the families of those who lost their lives, and our thoughts are with Mark, Jake and Adam and all those affected by what happened that day. And despite the nature of this tragedy, I hope you appreciated the way the information was presented. I'll see you on the next one, and I'll say bye-bye for now.